Imagine you are responsible for feeding 15 men every single day for 4 months straight in the middle of nowhere. No grocery store within 100 miles, no refrigeration, no running water, summer heat that could hit 110 degrees by noon, and if the food runs out or goes bad, men die. That was the reality of every cattle drive that crossed the American West between 1860 and 1890. More cowboys died from bad food and starvation on those trails than from every gunfight, every stampede, and every river crossing combined. Hollywood never shows you that part. My grandfather told me about this when I was barely old enough to understand it. He said the cowboy the movies invented was a man with a gun and a horse. The cowboy who actually built this country was a man who knew how to eat, how to preserve food, and how to keep 15 hungry men alive across 1,500 miles of land that wanted them dead. Today, I am going to show you exactly what those men ate, how they preserved it, and why the food knowledge they carried on those trails was more impressive, more sophisticated, and more ingenious than anything the modern food industry has produced since. Before we talk about the food itself, we need to talk about the machine that made it all possible. Because without this one invention, the great American cattle drives never happen. The towns that grew from them never exist. And the country that was built on the back of those drives looks completely different today. In 1866, a cattleman named Charles Goodnight took a surplus army wagon and rebuilt it from the ground up into something that had never existed before. He called it the chuck wagon. And it was not just a cart with food in it. It was a fully engineered mobile kitchen designed to feed a crew of 15 men 3 times a day across terrain that had no roads, no towns, and no margin for error. The genius was in the details. At the back of the wagon, Goodnight built what he called the chuck box, a cabinet with drawers and shelves that folded down on a hinge to create a full work surface. Every drawer had a specific purpose. One held sourdough starter, the living culture that kept bread on the table every morning. Another held coffee beans, which were worth more than almost anything else on the trail. Separate compartments for salt, sugar, dried beans, and the cook's spices. Underneath the wagon, suspended by leather straps, hung a wide, rawhide sling called the possum belly. This held firewood and dried buffalo chips for fuel on the open plains where trees could go miles without appearing. You burned what the land gave you, and dried buffalo dung burns cleaner than most men expect. The man who ran this wagon was called Cookie, and Cookie was the second highest paid man on the entire drive, right behind the trail boss himself. Smart cowboys understood why. The trail boss kept the herd moving. Cookie kept the men moving. Cross the trail boss and you might lose your job. Cross Cookie and you might go hungry for a week. Nobody crossed Cookie. Now let's talk about the food itself, because what these men figured out about preservation, storage, and nutrition without a single piece of modern science to guide them is nothing short of remarkable. The foundation of every cattle drive was salt pork and bacon, and the reason is simple. A properly cured side of bacon could last for months without refrigeration in brutal summer heat, bouncing across 1,500 miles of rough terrain. No other food available to those men could make that claim. The preservation process started months before the drive ever began. In late fall or early winter, when cold weather arrived, ranchers would slaughter hogs and begin the cure. Timing was everything. The cold air helped slow spoilage during the critical first days of the process before the salt had time to do its work. The method was precise. They would pack the pork belly into wooden barrels, alternating layers of meat and coarse salt, each layer 2 inches thick. This was not a light dusting. They used 8 to 10 pounds of salt for every 100 pounds of meat. The salt pulled moisture out of the tissue, creating an environment where bacteria simply could not survive. The meat would sit in that cure for 4 to 6 weeks. What came out of that barrel was almost inedible, straight from the salt. So salty it had to be soaked in fresh water for hours, sometimes overnight, just to bring it down to a level a man could eat. Even then, it was saltier than anything most people today have ever put in their mouths. A crew of 12 to 15 men would carry 200 to 300 pounds of salt pork for a full drive. That works out to roughly a pound per man per week, which sounds like almost nothing until you understand what that pound actually was. Pure fat and protein, dense caloric fuel for men burning 4,000 to 5,000 calories a day, 16 hours in the saddle, in summer heat that had no mercy. My grandfather understood this math intuitively. He said the old-timers did not eat for pleasure on the trail. They ate for fuel. Every bite had a job to do, and nothing was wasted. Nothing. The fat rendered from that bacon was as valuable as the meat itself. Cookie saved every drop. It went into the beans, into the biscuits, into the gravy, into anything that needed heat and calories. A chuck wagon that ran out of bacon grease was a chuck wagon in serious trouble. Now, beans. Every Western movie shows cowboys eating beans around a campfire. But what those movies never explain is why beans were chosen above almost everything else available. It was not tradition, it was engineering. Dried beans were lightweight, compact, nearly indestructible, and could last for 2 to 3 years if kept dry. A 50-pound sack of pinto beans took up less space than a saddle and could feed a full crew for weeks. They survived dust storms, river crossings, and months of rough trail without losing anything that mattered. And here is what makes beans genuinely remarkable. They are one of the few foods that actually gets better with time, up to a point. Year-old dried beans, stored properly, cook up just as well as fresh dried ones. The chuck wagon could carry a season's supply without a single concern about spoilage. The preparation was an all-day process. Cookie would start the beans in the morning, sometimes the night before. A few pounds of dried pintos into a Dutch oven, covered with water, a chunk of salt pork dropped in for fat and flavor. That pot would sit on the edge of the campfire, simmering slowly for 6 to 8 hours. What came out was not fancy, but after a long day of dust and cattle and heat, beans slow cooked in pork fat, sopped up with fresh biscuits, was better than anything those men could have found in a city restaurant. My grandfather always said the best food he ever ate was simple food, cooked slow, by someone who understood what hunger actually felt like. He said that knowledge died somewhere between the microwave and the drive-thru, and the country has been worse for it ever since. Now, the one item on every chuck wagon that got more care and attention than anything else. More than the coffee, more than the salt pork, more than the tools or the weapons or the spare harness leather. A small ceramic crock, about the size of a coffee can, wrapped in a flour sack and tucked into the warmest corner of the chuck box. Sourdough starter. This was not an ingredient. This was a living organism, a culture of wild yeast and bacteria that the cook kept alive, fed daily, and protected from cold, heat, and moisture, like it was a member of the crew. Because, in a very real sense, it was. Without sourdough starter, there was no bread. Without bread, there was no way to get enough calories into 15 working men every single day. Commercial yeast did not exist in a stable form in the 1860s. The sourdough culture was the only option, which meant the culture had to survive, or the men did not eat. Cookie fed the starter every morning. Flour and water, worked in with his hands, keeping the culture active and healthy. On cold nights, when temperatures dropped below what the culture could survive, Cookie slept with the crock against his body. He literally slept with his sourdough starter. That is not a colorful detail. That is a man who understood that his culture dying overnight meant 15 men going without bread for however long it took to rebuild it from scratch. He made the calculation, and he made it every night without complaint. Every morning, Cookie would take a portion of that starter and mix it with flour, salt, and bacon grease. He would pat the dough out on the chuck wagon's fold-down work surface, cut rounds with a tin can, and place them in a Dutch oven. Hot coals on top of the lid and underneath the pot, creating an oven effect in the open air. 30 minutes later, fresh bread, in the middle of nowhere. A good cook could turn out 50 to 60 biscuits in a single batch. Cowboys called them sinkers because they were dense enough to sit in your stomach for hours. That was not a complaint. That was the point. A biscuit that kept a man full through 6 hours of hard riding was a biscuit doing its job. Now, the one thing cowboys valued more than almost anything else on the trail. More than tobacco, more than whiskey. Some would argue more than their horses. Run out of this, and you had a serious problem on your hands. Coffee. Cowboys drank coffee morning, noon, and night. A gallon or more per man per day on a hard drive. Not because they particularly loved the taste, though they did, but because it served two purposes that nothing else on the trail could replace. The caffeine kept men functional through 16-hour days in conditions that would break most people today. and the boiling killed the bacteria in whatever water source they had pulled from. Cowboys traveling across the open plains could not always find clean water, but they could always boil what they found and make coffee out of it. The men who drank coffee instead of plain water stayed healthier. They did not know the science, they just knew the pattern. The coffee came as whole roasted beans, which was critical. Ground coffee went stale in days. Whole beans lasted for months. Every morning, Cookie would grind enough for the day using a hand-crank grinder mounted to the side of the wagon. The sound of that grinder was the alarm clock of the entire camp. When you heard it, you knew it was time to move. The brewing method was simple. A large pot holding 2 to 3 gallons. Ground coffee directly into the water, brought to a boil, then settled with a handful of crushed eggshells or a cup of cold water to drop the grounds to the bottom. Cowboys called it cowboy coffee, strong enough to float a horseshoe, thick enough to chew. One man described it as the only coffee in the world that drinks you back. My grandfather made coffee this way his entire life. Said anything filtered was just hot colored water. Said if you could see through your coffee, you had not made coffee yet. Now, the silent killer that took down more men on those trails than outlaws, snakes, and bad weather combined. Not a predator, not a weapon, a missing vitamin. Scurvy, the same disease that decimated naval crews for centuries before anyone understood what caused it. Without vitamin C, the body begins to break down from the inside. Bleeding gums, loose teeth, weakness in the joints, eventually death. And it moves slowly enough that by the time the symptoms are serious, the damage is already done. Smart trail bosses knew this, not because they understood vitamins. Those would not be identified by science for another 50 years, but because they had seen what happened when crews went months without fresh food. They had watched men deteriorate on long drives and learned to prevent it through observation and experience. The solution was dried fruit. Dried apples were the most common, sliced thin before the drive began, laid out in the sun for days until leathery and dry, packed into cloth sacks that took up almost no space in the wagon. Those dried apple rings could last for months and reconstitute completely when cooked in water with sugar. Cookie would make apple pie by stewing dried apples with sugar and cinnamon, sandwiching the mixture between 2 layers of sourdough dough in a Dutch oven. It was not your grandmother's apple pie, but after weeks of beans and salt pork, it tasted like something those men would have ridden an extra 100 miles for. There are accounts, documented accounts, of fistfights breaking out over the last piece of apple pie on a cattle drive. Real fistfights over pie. That is how much it mattered. Dried peaches, apricots, and prunes also made the list. Prunes served double duty, vitamin C and digestive relief after months of a diet built almost entirely on meat and beans. Cowboys called them prairie strawberries, which may have made them slightly more appealing. Probably not much. Now, something that surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. On a cattle drive, cowboys almost never ate beef. Think about that. 15 men driving 2,000 head of cattle across 1,500 miles of open country, and beef was almost never on the menu. The reason was simple and brutal. Those cattle were the product. Every animal that died or was slaughtered meant money lost, jobs endangered, and a trail boss with a very specific opinion about whoever made the call to kill it. The herd was not the food supply. The herd was the entire point of the journey. Trail bosses would only authorize killing a beef if an animal was badly injured and could not continue, or if the crew was truly desperate. When they did slaughter an animal, it created an immediate problem. 600 pounds of fresh meat, no refrigeration, summer heat, and a crew that could only eat so much in one sitting. The slaughter would happen in the evening. Cookie would immediately begin cooking. That night, the crew would eat everything they possibly could. Fresh steaks, roasts, organ meats that would be the first to turn. They ate until they could not eat anymore, because by morning, the rest of that meat was racing against time and flies. What could not be eaten fresh, Cookie would slice thin, salt heavily, and hang near the fire to smoke through the night. Making jerky was a race. In summer heat, meat could begin to spoil in hours. Cookie would work until dawn if he had to. Nothing was wasted. That was not a slogan. That was survival. Now the food that no cowboy wanted to eat, but every smart trail boss made sure was always on the wagon. Hard enough to break a tooth, bland enough to make beans taste like a celebration, and capable of lasting for years without spoiling. Hardtack, flour, water, and salt, baked until every trace of moisture was gone, hard as wood, and about as appealing to eat. But hardtack could sit in a chuck wagon for an entire season, through heat, cold, river crossings, and dust storms, and still be edible at the end. Cowboys would soak it in coffee to soften it. Cookie would break it apart with a hammer and use it to thicken stews. When everything else ran out, when the wagon tipped in a river crossing and half the supplies were ruined, hardtack was what stood between the crew and starvation. It sometimes came with company, weevils, small beetles that would bore into the crackers during long storage. Cowboys would tap the hardtack on a rock to knock the bugs loose, then eat it anyway. Most preferred to eat it in the dark. What you could not see could not ruin the meal. They had a saying about it. Hardtack is the only food that fights back. They were not entirely joking. The Great Plains were not as empty as they looked. To men who knew what to look for, those grasslands were a running supply line of food that cost nothing and spoiled nothing. Wild onions grew in patches you could smell before you could see. Cookie would send a couple of cowboys out with sacks, and that night's beans would have actual flavor beyond salt and fat. The onions provided vitamin C without anyone knowing what vitamin C was. They just knew fresh vegetation kept men healthier. That observation, born from experience, kept crews alive for months at a time. Prickly pear cactus, the pads roasted over fire after removing the spines, tasting something like green beans with a texture that took some getting used to. The ripe fruit, sweet and juicy, a genuine luxury in the desert. Cowboys called it the vegetable that fights back, because even after you thought every spine was gone, you would find tiny ones embedded in your fingers for days afterward. Prairie turnips, also called Indian breadroot, were a staple food of the Plains tribes that experienced cowboys learned to use. Starchy, filling, substantial. The trick was knowing what the plant looked like above ground, so you knew where to dig below it. That knowledge came from watching and from conversations with people who had lived on this land for generations longer than any cowboy had been alive. My grandfather had deep respect for that kind of knowledge, the kind learned from paying attention over a long time rather than reading it somewhere. He said the best lessons he ever learned came from people who had been doing something longer than he had been alive. He said that kind of knowledge does not get written down easily, and it disappears faster than people realize. He was talking about ranching. He was talking about everything, from salt pork, cured in winter barrels, to sourdough starter kept alive against a cook's body on cold nights, to wild onions pulled from the prairie soil by men who learned to read the land. Every meal on those cattle drives was a small victory. Against heat, against distance, against a landscape that offered no comfort and asked no mercy. The men who made those drives did not have science. They did not have refrigeration. They did not have supply chains or grocery stores or any of the systems modern people take for granted before breakfast every morning. What they had was observation, patience, and knowledge passed down from every generation that came before them, tested against reality, and kept only if it worked. My grandfather said something about this that I have never forgotten. He said the difference between knowledge and wisdom is that knowledge tells you what works. Wisdom tells you why. And the cowboys who crossed this country had both in a way that most people today will never fully understand. Drop your state in the comments and tell me if anyone in your family ever preserved food the old way. Salted meat, dried fruit, sourdough starter passed down through generations. I want to know how much of this knowledge is still out there, still alive in family kitchens, waiting to be used again. Drop your state in the comments and tell me if anyone in your family ever preserved food the old way. Salted meat, dried fruit, sourdough starter passed down through generations. I want to know how much of this knowledge is still out there, still alive in family kitchens, waiting to be used again.